that one.
Okay, so we've started.
I'm just going to send out the updated link, and then whenever you're ready. Can probably kick it off today. Thank you very much for being here today, and a special welcome to our wonderful guests, Gorka and Carlos, who will be taking turns to present to us today, in the course of this innovation conversation, some of the ways we can leverage platforms as tools to increase our development impact. This is part of our innovation conversation series, and it's great to see a lot of folks around the table, as well as acknowledge some of the colleagues that will be connecting live. Apologies for the late start. We had to switch the link to the web stream, and hopefully now it's up and running, with thanks to Janine for that. And before I hand over the floor to you, Carlos and Gorka, perhaps Millie, you can come in with a quick framing for the conversation. Sure. to help us navigate. And thanks again for the opportunity to have you two guys and extend the invitation to all of us to be here. Thank you.
Bernardo, thank you so much. So with the work that the organization has done on the platforms, quite a bit of feedback coming from country offices has been, how do we use this platform way of working in our own work? What's really different? How does it help us be better? How does it help us design better solutions? So one part of the effort has been looking out and seeing who are the organizations who are a bit ahead of where we are right now. And this is how we came across the work that Carlos and Gorka are doing. And really, probably the first interesting part to me has been this effort in the Basque Country, where that debunked some of the thinking and theory and paradigms that we have in conflict countries, where originally there's quite a bit of research that says you have to create peace as conditions for economic development. And through applying some of the open innovation platforms in the Basque Country, we see that actually it was the economic transition that helped lead to peace and to quite a bit of a different situation in the Basque region. In addition to that, the work around applying open innovation platforms in developing context takes place in Peru, Mozambique, India, Colombia. So today, the intention behind this talk is really to hear from the trenches, from the field, what does it mean to apply platforms in development? What is different, and why does this work matter? And with this, I hand it over to Gorka.
Well, thank you very much, Millie, and it's a real pleasure to be here, because for a long time, we've been trying to understand how this process that UNDP was implementing around platform work, and because we had the impression that it was very similar to what we were doing, and we are these days having conversations with different UNDP teams about this, and we really feel that there is a very direct connection. So, I'm going to try just to give you some background about the type of work we're doing and the ideas behind, so we can have a conversation. And I think that probably will be most useful for everyone. And then I will introduce my colleague Carlos, that comes from the Mondragon cooperative. That is actually the largest industrial cooperative in the world, and one of the key drivers of the socio-economic transformation of the Basque region. Okay, so just start by saying this graphic is just we used this last year for an event we organized here in New York with our partners at Columbia University, and our platform work actually comes from practice, and I think that's the main point. That is not, we don't get into platform work by theory or only by research. Actually, in our case we were trying to understand how the Basque region of Spain, if you're not familiar with the story, but 40 years ago was in a very difficult moment because at the end of dictatorship, 40 years of dictatorship, and a deep economic collapse, very similar to many industrial cities in Europe and the US. And at the top of that, we had a serious problem of violence. During those years, more than 100 people will be killed. So there are very few examples of areas in the world that when you have that combination of political, economic, social, and violence, kind of combination, you just normally get worse. A few examples of change. In our case, the area today has very advanced sustainable human development indicators, top ranking in GDP per capita in the south of Europe, lowest poverty indicators as well. And in terms of what for me is the most interesting thing, in terms of inequality, we have also some of the less unequal standards. And this is a very important element because normally when you have rapid economic growth, normally you also see really a deep inequality indicators. In our case, thanks to people like Carlos and the Mondragon, I will try to explain, that hasn't been the case. So we created a group at the university to understand this transformation in order to keep the transformation going and to share this internationally. And we realized that the way of understanding that has in the region had been by understanding the economics, understanding the social, understanding the politics, but there was no interconnected analysis. So how economics were influencing peace building and the other way around, for example. And even today, it's quite hard to get those analyses. And we end up, I can give you there's a lot of research behind this, but basically, we end up discovering that you cannot understand the Basque transformation unless you apply a platform lens, unless you understand that in some naturally and without design, public authorities, private sector, social economy, NGO, actually everyone was connected in a transformation platform. We can discuss more details about this happened, but we realized about that, and then we also realized that as important as the hardware of the platform, that we call hardware, like the artifacts you can measure. For example, in the case of the Bilbao transformation, the Guggenheim Museum and the impact of that physical transformation of the city. The Mondragon cooperative, the public policies, those artifacts cannot be understood without the software. Software meaning what was driving people in their mental models, in their narratives, for believing that such a transformation was possible. And this is for us a key factor that as important as understanding the how is the why. The why, in this case, in the Basque area and in other areas, people think that change is possible, and why not? Because understanding really what is going on in the underlying element of the software, in our experience, has given a lot of information to understand how platforms work. Okay, I leave it there because otherwise I will be talking about this for 2 hours. But maybe you're interested. So since then, what we've been trying is to go into operation. How to actually understand these processes, but actually how do you put in, how do you create platforms that can integrate these 2 dimensions of hardware and software. And then for us, we've been working around these models of how platforms can combine deep listening into these cultural and social dynamics that normally determine if the platform works or not, and the action. and the artifacts. And normally what we see is that there are a lot of platforms that put all the emphasis on the action, or most of the emphasis on the action, on some platforms that put a lot of the emphasis on the understanding, on the analysis. But there are very, very few that are balanced, that really can, and this is really hard. I mean, there are few because it's really hard. And but this is what we think one of the keys of working in this way. Okay, so I'll move a little. This is a model. Sorry, this is the graphics in Spanish, but we also have it in English. So what we've been doing is just not to concentrate only on the Basque experience. What we have been doing is working internationally on understanding similar challenges and how to create open innovation platforms that can incorporate these two dimensions of software and hardware. And these days we are with a group of La Caixa Banking Foundation, that is the sixth largest foundation in assets in the world, that's based in Spain. But they had a very strong program on international development, and they requested us to redesign the program with a platform lens about 3 years ago. So this program is now working in India, Peru, and Mozambique. And Carlos, we are now. Carlos will tell you about the new program that we are going to be starting in Colombia with the same approach. So all these platforms follow this kind of same process of how we listen differently, how do we understand, and how we learn how to listen differently. We can talk about that later, because normally when you talk to NGOs or governments, everybody's listening. Of course, you say, "No, we are already listening," and of course, we are all listening. The question is, how are we listening? How deep is our listening? And how are we connecting the listening of these social and cultural dynamics connected with action? And then how do we co-create? So how do we connect the listening from co-creation in real time? So we don't differentiate analysis and action, actually how we integrate those levels. And how do we prototype in different levels of action? This is also another learning from the Basque experience, that when you see why the Basque experience generated systemic change, in our opinion, was that because different levels of actions were interconnected under a movement building approach. That meaning that community actions without business model, small actions, medium and large scale actions, public sector actions, and regulation were actually interconnected. And you see a lot of actions when you see, like in a particular intervention, you normally have a lot of these elements going on. NGOs doing something, UNDP doing something else, the government. The question is, are those elements interconnected, and how are they interconnected? Because normally we try to interconnect them from a kind of a hierarchical or a traditional management approach. But actually what we learn from the Basque experience is that interconnection is cultural. It's about, are we naturally trying to go in the same direction? What are the values that are driven our intervention? What are the stories that we are using to explain our value and belief system? And are those underlying software elements consistent with the action? Okay. And finally, just to the process. I mean, we can share with you in more detail how this is working, but just in 2 minutes to see the differences. This is a linear process, and as we say, it's not linear, but just for understanding it, in a short time. So basically, what we are experimenting with, and I say experimenting because we think nobody knows how to do this properly. So we say if somebody comes and say that they know how to do this thoroughly, I think it's better to run away, because there is no knowledge to do everything. And normally what we get is we try to bring different knowledge to get as far as we can. So we are experimenting in India, Peru, Mozambique, and now in Colombia about different ways of listening that combine, of course, macro analysis, data, digital tools, but also with like deep listening at the community level, with ethnographic tools, with design thinking, and actually how we combine all the different tools in each particular place. And as important of how do we listen differently, how do we interpret the information differently? Because we can have the best information, but the information is interpreted only by expert analysis, we normally get to the same places. So actually we are experimenting on collective interpretation, how people, because the collective interpretation is the best, most efficient tool for action. Because when you bring people together about, to understand what is going on, the ideas for action just emerge naturally. So there is, and the main difference, for example, in a practical example about this way of working in Peru, is that in Peru, we can tell you in the areas where we are working at 4,000 meter height, we can tell you which projects and people who want to do new activities around employment generation, who want to stay in the area and who wants to leave the area. So if you have a UNDP program or La Caixa program, which our goal is to transform that area in the long term, then you need to, this information is really important because most of innovation programs are actually supporting those people who want to leave the area, who actually want to live and go to live in Cusco, go to live in Lima. And therefore, our programs are reinforcing strategies that are actually not going to help in the long term. Then we are, once that we identify those opportunities, we are co-creating in 5 different levels of action, as I said before. Community actions without business model that are very important. For example, in India, we discovered that the main problem for women in the area where we're working in Uttar Pradesh for generate new employment opportunities is actually not training or access to capital. It is actually the difficulties that their families and husbands are putting for that person to drive a new business. And secondly, safety. There's a huge problem of mobility in that particular area for women to just go to they want to go. So we ended up creating a new rickshaw business driven by women and only for women. So actually women can actually move around the area and actually connect with women that are doing similar type of work in that particular area. So that prototype, that is kind of a medium-sized prototype, that actually can scale to thousands of rickshaw, is actually connected with education and community actions programs, but actually larger interventions in terms of investment and education. And so this is where we are at the moment. We are trying to learn how you manage a portfolio of prototypes that are initiatives on a community level, small, larger scale, service redesign, and regulation. And our experience that everybody talks about this, but nobody really is doing it in that. So normally we tend to work with the partners that we normally, kind of have more experience with. So big organizations, we will work more on larger scale programs, community organizations in small, but the interconnection between those levels is very rare to see. And therefore, what we are trying to measure is actually a change of narrative. So in that particular area in India, in Peru, and in Mozambique, what we are measuring is actually through our program, are people telling a different story about what is possible or not in the area, or are they telling the same story? If there is no change in the narrative, we are failing. And that's the new indicators that we are introducing. Okay, so finally, because I'm going to give my time to Carlos, we have some information about what are in practice the main changes from working in traditional way to working in platform. And we've been able to kind of identify at least 10 critical points from the listening part, for example, as I was saying, how are we listening now, how normally a platform listen, the difference between how do we interpret the information traditionally, how can we interpret that information in a collective manner, how do we co-create for like one level, or how do we co-create for 5 different levels? How do we, so, and let's say like a point by point, we can actually see and share, in our opinion, which are the differences between working in the traditional way and working in the platform way. I'll stop there because otherwise we don't have time. But just let me introduce my colleague, Carlos. In my opinion, represents a cooperative company that is probably one of the largest platforms, socioeconomic platforms in the world. And for many years, when we had discussions with them, they never present them as a platform. They present themselves as a company. We are a company. But actually, I don't think you can understand anything they do without that lens. And actually, the whole ecosystem where they have created in the Basque region, that is one of these drivers of why the Basque area was able to generate a socio-economic transformation under violent situation. I think once you start understanding what they do from that lens, you really kind of go much farther. And in our case, what was incredible to see is that it's one of the few examples where the violence stopped, not because there was a political agreement. In our case, violence stopped because the vast majority of the population, including those who were supporting violence in the past, said it's enough. We don't want this anymore. And if you ask why that happened, what you actually see is an overall process transformation on social and economical terms. Okay, so thank you for your patience. And
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. First of all, thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to present the different experiences. I will explain first of all Mondragon.
I'll ask you to speak a bit louder because we broadcasted this, and I think the microphones will take
okay.
it. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, sorry.
No problem.
Okay, you can move into the other slide.
Thank you.
Mondragon is some main.
No, it's good.
No, it's okay.
This will pick up.
Okay.
Thank you.
This main figures. Okay, Mondragon is a cooperative platform where more or less 81,000 workers, partners are working. There are two main businesses. You can see top left, industry and distribution. Okay, and then we have finance and knowledge to support the two main businesses. Mondragon, I can say, this social innovation ecosystem. Okay, it's a federation of cooperatives. Each cooperative has total freedom to design and to develop their strategy. Okay, it's an open platform where each cooperative decides to connect or not, and the platform is managed through principles and values and through intercooperation platforms that are found to reinforce the sustainability of the whole ecosystem, finance the university, finance the training, help cooperatives with problems, okay, develop new ventures, and promote internationalization. Okay, top left, you can see industry. As Gorka says, we are the first industrial cooperative group worldwide. Very internationalized group. Is we have more or less 143 manufacturing plants abroad, okay, and 17 corporate offices. Okay, in the top right you can see the distribution business. The bottom, the left, the finance unit. We have our social security system. That is, the name is Lagunaro. This is the equity fund we have, more or less 6,500 million euros. And this is our bank. It's not very big. That is our bank. That you can see there the figures of assets under administration, more or less 21,000 million euros. In the right, the bottom, we have the knowledge division. We have our university. It's not very big, but it's our business-oriented university. We have 4 degrees and 4 faculties: business administration and entrepreneurship, humanity and science of education, engineering, and Basque Culinary Center. We have also a culinary university. Okay. 15 research and development center, and also we have a model that is called Mondragon for Future. That's an integrated system platform for innovate, promote, and knowledge. Okay. Some main figures. This is one thing that is very important for us. Our story is a history of self-sufficiency. Say, our project is fully promotional. Okay, we start in 1941. This one guy, our founder, that is Jose Maria Arizmendiarreta. This is a Basque name. He arrives to Mondragon. Mondragon is a little town in Basque country. Okay, and in 1943, we create, for us, these very important things, our vocational training center. We need train people to carry out, to develop the project. This is a very important year for us. More or less in 1952, we create the first industrial cooperative. In 1958, okay, yes, we create Lagunaro, that is our social security system. 1959, we regenerate our bank, Caja Laboral. Okay, in 1960, we start with evolution. We integrate new industrial cooperative, our asset at manufacturer assembly lines. And there is one thing very important. In 1988 was held the first Mondragon Cooperative Congress. Okay, where the basic principles were approved, and also the basis for setting up the intercooperative solidarity funds. This is very important for us. The intercooperation for make us more sustainable. And in 1991, we start with the consolidation and in international expansion. As you can see, it's a history of self-sufficiency, and for us is we have very clear that our project in the past and in the future is going to be a promotional project. We do it ourselves with our hands. Okay, this is Mondragon. Okay, then let's move to Colombia. What we are doing in Colombia, we try to share Mondragon experience, how to build up innovation platform. We try to build up together with all the agents this kind of platform. Okay, this is the scope of the project. It's a national scope project. We are working with in the peace process in Colombia. We are working with the combatants. They are now more or less located in 26 areas in a lot of Colombia's departments. The areas are named ETCR, that more or less means temporary areas of capacitation and reincorporation, and the combatants are moving to new areas, new reincorporation areas. We are talking more or less about 40,000 people living in Colombia. In the right, you can see different pictures of how these ETCR are in different locations. As you can see, it's a national scope project, and this is our approach. In our approach, we try, as I told you, we try to share our Mondragon experience and try to build up a social innovation platform also in Colombia, together with a lot of agents. The main goal of the project is the collective reincorporation of the FARC combatants. This is one. The repair, also the repair. okay, and prove that a cooperative model and social innovation approach can be replicated and scaled to promote equal development and reconciliation. Okay, the scope of the project include different initiatives that are connected. All those initiatives are connected in a platform. You can see some initiatives. Ecomun is Economías Sociales del Común, is the cooperative that is formed by ex-combatants. Okay, and you can see Ecomun and the cooperative have been structured as a group managed with cooperative principles and values, developing sustainable businesses. Sustainable business need for social and economical reincorporation. Okay. Fish farming, we have also another initiative, fish farming, value chain, implement and conceive as economic flow generation activity. We have also investment to set up a fish farming value chain. Also develop national and regional nature tourist proposal in collaboration with the municipalities, prepare by economic and social development to the surrounding communities with environmental respect. Those are all the initiatives that are connected in a transformation innovation platform. Okay. And all the initiatives, as I told you, are connected and developed, all of them, with a cycle that is repeated, as Gorka presented. Is repeated in different waves. Okay, that which generates a movement, a social movement. The process, Gorka told us, is research, deep listening, co-creation, prototype and scale, governance, finance, and evaluation. All the initiative connected to reach these main goals: collective reincorporation, repair, and prove that cooperative model and social innovation approach can be replicated to promote this egalitarian development. This is the whole platform. And then we can, I don't know, this next one. Yeah. And this is an example of one of this initiative that is, designed as a social innovation process. That is the fish farming value chain example. It is one of the initiatives that are connected in the platform. Okay, we are now finishing the first phase, research and co-creation. We did at the very beginning a listening analysis of Ecomun, Economías Sociales del Común. This is a cooperative, it's combatant members. The narrative on the configuration of the fish farming activity, its vision of the project impact in the incorporation process, the promotion of new cooperatives, in the other agents, in the territories with the victims, is very important also in that process. And we change in the co-creation phase. We change the approach, the first approach, going from extended production configuration. It was a disaggregated approach to a configuration by value change. Value change nodes enhancing the benefits for all. It's more or less. And we are now, or we did the socialization in the General Assembly of the General Assembly of the cooperative held in March. So we finished this first phase, the research and conclusion, changing the approach of the initiative because of the impact. We wanted to extend the impact in all, in the territories, in the victims, in different agents. Now we are going to face now the third phase, and that is the prototype and scale, and also we design a progressive prototyping, okay, in different waves. Of the fish farming value chain. So the new version of the prototype, collect the experience of the version or the previous one. Okay, and this is more or less what we are doing. We will connect we will start with this phase and then finish with the phase of governance, finance, and evaluation. That is, we have a governance model configuration with a lot of agents, and we consider that the configuration of a serious business from value chain perspective, profitable at the national, international level, will attract new investors. And this is more or less what we are doing in Colombia.
Thank you, Carlos. Probably now is, we can open.
We can speak a lot about the project and Mondragon, but we don't have enough time. Okay.
No, thank you. We thanks very much for that, both of you, Gorka and Carlos. And that's extremely informative. It's a lot of information to unpack. I think the colleagues here around the table as well, I have about 15 to 17 people that connected. We got 18 that connected. This is broadcast live to all of our offices, which gives you a sense, by the way, that we are a platform already, because we do have the shared principles, the shared culture, and I heard this in your presentation woven in. Very important elements how you get these platforms to be a reality. The other thing that struck me from your presentation, Carlos, is that you've had 80 years, essentially since 1941, to troubleshoot and refine this concept over different iterations of it. And that's very revealing to me. How you know, it's not an overnight transformation, but there's tons of learning that we as an organization can really take on board now to try and see and zero in what are the elements that could be of help. I don't want to hog the floor, so let me open it to colleagues here as well as to the colleagues online who may have to post their question in writing. We'll read it out to you. So colleagues, Charu, please. And maybe you can introduce yourself, just your name. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Charu. Working here at UNDP. I do a lot of livelihoods economic recovery work, and we're looking also at digital solutions. Thank you very much for your presentation. I think it is like, we have so many questions, but I'll just ask one, because I heard something on the listening part, which is very important for our projects as we move forward, actually listening to whether our projects are making a difference, what's the impact being made, are we asking the right questions? And I heard you mention something around the cultural, the values, and what are the stories. So how are you harnessing that data? Because and you said also that you do it at a real-time basis rather than taking 6 months.
Yes.
So I just want to hear a bit on the technicalities of that.
Yes. Very briefly, we can share more information, but in each case is different. So each of the platform approach, instead of us telling the local organizations, this is the way you listen, actually we started by saying, how would you listen? You know, how would you understand better what is going on in that particular area? For example, in the case of Uttar Pradesh, where we are working with livelihoods as well, or in Peru or in Mozambique. So organizations came with different ideas. Some of them were like traditional way of understanding data. So this is the data that the government has, this is the data that the organization has, you know, like a more quantitative analysis. And then normally that would be combined with some qualitative work, focus groups and interviews. And we normally say, okay, that's good, but are we getting the information we want by listening that way? And then most of the organization would say no. And I say, why not? And I say, because the big macro analysis normally gives you the bigger picture, but it doesn't give you the information about why, as we said, you know, female or entrepreneurs in Uttar Pradesh are not using the services that are available for them, for example. And when you actually do interviews and focus groups, they don't tell you either that the problem might be that if they do that, they will have problems at home, or that they don't feel safe enough to do a particular thing. So, and most importantly, what we know is in terms of job generation, for example, it is not either what you say, it's a much more profound self-conviction of what you are capable of doing or not. So for example, we discovered that and this is normally not an individual narrative, but actually a community narrative, where people, in the case of Mondragon, for example, Mondragon is an extraordinary case where in an area that is not a city, actually it's a suburban area that was quite disconnected from urban areas, people develop a sense that they could change what was going on there. So the question is, how do you listen to understand if the underlying narrative is we can change the situation or we cannot change the situation? Because most of the employment programs, if you don't know what is the underlying thing, you might invest in tons of money on programs, but they don't have an impact because people don't think it's possible to change. While in other areas, like in Mondragon, we don't know why people develop this idea that they were going to change. It didn't matter. It was so bad a situation. It didn't matter. They were going to change that. So we are listening to that in, as I said, applying design thinking tools. For example, in Peru, we were able to create personas, like with the most advanced design thinking tools we do, but with a group of people who maybe are not able to read or write. So we kind of adapting a lot of design thinking tools to particular communities. But the most important thing is what we call the sessions for collective interpretation, or what some people would call the sense making. So how do you actually do that? For us has been the key, because if you only do one analysis, one interpretation of the data, and it's actually an expert analysis, you will get to the same place where you were. It doesn't matter what quality of information you have, because you are reading the data from your own lens all the time. So actually inviting very different people to that interpretation and doing that interpretation, that's what I say in real time, meaning you don't do that once at the beginning and at the end, but actually, how do you actually generate spaces for people to have a collective analysis of what is going on based on the data? And what we discover is that actually and this my academic friends might not agree a lot with that. For us, the quality of the data is not as important as the quality of the interpretation or the discussion. Because actually, when you have data that is limited, people in the interpretation will tell you, this data is not telling you why women in this town are not going to do that. And then some people will tell you, I'm going to tell you why they are not doing that. And if that opinion is true, some other people will say, she's right. We haven't listened to that. We need to understand that dynamic better. So actually, the co-creation of the initiatives evolves in the same way that the co-creation of the interpretation. So we normally disconnect the interpretation from the action. And actually, it's the same process. It evolves. And the richer it is in terms of different profiles, in different of settings, in different of tools, the better you get. You never get a total, like a perfect analysis, but I actually get a lot of information, as the one that we said before in Peru. Just, it's as simple as saying, what are you going to do if you get this business going? What are you going to do? And they're going to say, well, I'm going to invest in doing something else here. I'm going to take the money, I'm going to run away to Lima the next day. So just sometimes it's very simple, just to, in some other places like in and this is not only in Wales, in the UK, we discovered that in the school, teachers were telling their students, you need to study to leave this town. And when we told the parents that they were saying that, parents said, yes, we say the same thing at home. Okay, so the story of the place is that success is to leave the town. How do you expect that there's going to be any long-term transformation? Doesn't matter how much money you invest in entrepreneurial programs, it's not going to work. So this part we think is we could discuss about the practicalities, but there are so many methods, and for example, we are now experimenting with art as a fundamental vehicle for understanding those narratives, and actually for changing narrative. Because what we want to understand is not only what is going on, but actually how the initiative generates a transformational narrative. So normally, first phase is you understand individual narratives, then the collective interpretation gets you into a common narrative of what is going on. But that will have no impact unless we create, by doing, a narrative transformation. That is the narrative that Mondragon had. Like, we are changing this. It doesn't matter how. Just, we are going to do this. And that is, those are the dynamics that we think we are normally not, we call that the cultural dimension of the innovation process, that will normally determine the impact of the platform. and I think nobody knows how to do this properly, but we have some tools, and I think it will be amazing to be able to connect with some of the platforms that you guys are developing, because I think can give us such a rich information. And all the guys in Mondragon, they did this without making any design about it. It was a natural. But the question is, and some people say, okay, so you cannot do that. It only can happen in Mondragon. And we say, well, of course, the Basque, we like to say that we are very unique in the world, but we actually not that unique. If Mondragon guys can do it, why can't this cannot happen in other parts of the world? Sorry for the long answer.
That's good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll take one more question, then I have a question from a colleague in Oslo. So if you want to go ahead now.
Yeah, thank you so much. My name is Shayma, and I work with the Rule of Law team, Justice and Security here in UNDP. I'm thinking of the way we do our work. Usually in the area of justice and security, we go for perception surveys, collect data from people, and from there we base our solutions. But now I understand now somehow the difference. It's about taking the data and discussing the outcome of it with the community.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but my question is about if you apply it at a community level, how would us at UNDP apply it at a country at a larger scale where we are looking at the SDGs and UNDP role as a platform?
Yes.
So I'm not sure how we can take this, like if there's some kind of
Yes.
text.
No, that's the real challenge I think we have, because if we don't get there, we are not going to go very far. So that's what we are learning. So how can the platform be operating at the same time in the community level, micro level, municipality or region, and at the same time operating at the national level and even global level? So how are we? And we haven't done it properly yet, but it's in some ways it's very similar. The question is, how do we interconnect the levels? So when we are getting that data at the about what is going on, for example, in our unemployment, so we need government people to be interpreting data as well, in the same room with local actors, but actually in different rooms with private sector, top companies, like NGOs, etc. Because and we actually need to conduct as well listening to the power structures, because that's another big gap we have identified, that we think that it's only about listening those who are suffering most. And of course, that's fundamental. But actually, we need to understand also what is the narrative behind the big corporations. Because a lot of big corporations, they say, yeah, I'm going to invest in this area, I'm going to generate employment. But the narrative is like, this area is useless. It's useless. There's nothing you can do here. So we need to understand that. But actually, the same thing normally happens with government officials, that they will never say it in public. But when you are having dinner, they'll say, in that area of the country, there's nothing you can do. In that area, you can do. But in that area, there's nothing you can do. And that you will have heard that many, many times. So how do you base your analysis that there's nothing you can do in that area? So you are interpreting, you are creating a narrative of what is possible or not in that particular area. And it's really important to put that in the surface, because people don't realize and say, you are saying that there's nothing you can do. And so those levels of and I said, we would love to discuss with you, how can we experiment?
It can be done. For example, you have the Mondragon example. For example, Mondragon was a very little town in a very poor area, really poor area. And we always say we were the losers of our civil war. It can be done. It can be done. Because we change the narrative. Say, okay, we can do with our hands. And we did it, and we continue transforming our model. Yeah. Can be done.
Thank you. Let me maybe come in and relay a question from my colleague Asim, who's in Oslo. Our governance center is in Oslo, and it's somewhat a good segue to what we just discussing. And Asim is saying that during your presentation, we heard you mention the case of India, and you talked about Uttar Pradesh. Yes. And his question is, India is a very diverse country from a cultural perspective, different cultures. So how does that and with a particular cultural context. Are there any unique challenges that you observe in this context, a multicultural type
Yes.
context?
Yes.
Yeah, if you can elaborate.
Yes, it's a very good question. Thank you. Because as you know, it's very different to work in a place where there's one particular community or one culture, or a place where you have a lot of different cultures.
Yeah.
And actually, more and more, you see that there are very few places where it's only, it's just one particular. It's normally very, very plural, very diverse. So what we normally find, and this is very interesting, is that you have different narratives operating. So you have individual narratives, then group narratives, like a particular groups have different stories, but it's normally also a meta-narrative of the place. So that it doesn't matter how diverse is a particular area. There is a common sense about a configuration of a narrative that is common to the place. So, for example, in New York, in a neighborhood that is super diverse as well, you will find common elements of how people interpret that particular neighborhood. And this happens all around. So we need to be cautious about the different group narratives, but actually try to go deeper in what are the elements that are connecting all those narratives.
And this the same case in Colombia, for example. In Colombia we are working in whole Colombia. In Colombia you have Afro-descendants, you have indigenous people, you have I don't know, everywhere different cultures, and the meta-narrative is the peace process. And for FARC and for a communist, the faithful fulfillment of the peace agreement. And one thing very important in the peace agreement is to fight inequality. And this is the meta-narrative for the project. Right. And also, there is a lot of people, different people with different culture working in the project.
Absolutely. And in fact, I wonder also as a follow-up, to what extent certain cultures perhaps lend themselves more to this kind of operationalization. If you think about a culture that puts a premium on collectivity, on equality, as opposed to perhaps another economic mode that might put a premium on individualization of certain economic outcomes. But be that as it may, I actually have a question, because in your presentation, I didn't hear you say much about government. What is the role of government in this, beyond sort of the regulatory broad? Is it a laissez-faire type situation? We're happy to see these things happen, or because that's the space that UNDP works in and with. We're here to serve governments, to provide the opportunity. I see that as a fundamental linkage around the scaling element. If you show that works from the project. So perhaps you can share your observations.
Yeah, I think Carlos can share a lot about this, because for example, the way that Mondragon engages with governments is very interesting. The platforms take you to that this is one of main difference also working as a platform, is that no one is in total control. So that means that governments are no longer dictating everything. They are a fundamental part, but they are not controlling everything. Neither private companies, like even Mondragon, who can be like a big corporation. So how you make that shift? It's always very difficult. And our experience with governments is that it always depends on the person. It always depends on the person. So the governments can be super flexible and can be perfect partners for platforms, because they get it and they know that for their own. In the past case, and Mondragon can explain you that, the government realized they want, the better they do, the better for me. Because in this case, they say, the more money I can invest with Mondragon, I know that they will generate employment locally, because that's what is their goal, and their profits will be distributed equally. So actually, the money I invest in Mondragon is not going to end up somewhere else, because the investors are taking advantage of that profit. So for them, it was much easier to invest in Mondragon than to invest in a traditional private company, and that generated. But normally in the platform work, I think there is an art of convening. That is what UNDP does normally. It's like, okay, and the good thing is that you don't need a whole government to be involved. So normally, identifying the one right partner is enough to start. And it can be a local authority, can be regional, can be government. But what we have seen is that the key is which are the core members to start. That is always imperfect. But you start working, leaving the door open for others to come and for people to leave. At some moment they say, well, I am, this is not for me, or I am busy doing something else, so I'm not going to be part of it. So that dynamic of how do you manage complex systems, I think in the case of Mondragon, it's been a natural experience because of the context. But actually, when we are working in other places, we always see that challenge, and we see a lot of platforms thinking that they need to get the perfect governing model to start, and they never go very far because it's always limited. It's always so to start with, and it's actually the way you work that you actually attract more platform members. And the government role they see that they need to change the role. They can't control anymore, but it's very difficult for them because they feel they need to make sure that public money is properly used. What is agreed to. So that's I think a very important field that we are still trying to manage. But Carlos can talk a lot about this in Colombia now with the government.
I'd imagine,
Yeah, we have also the same thing in Colombia. That is the connection with the government is quite strong. There is a change of presidents with another way of doing or implement the peace agreement. But I mean, the connection with the government is very, very strong, and we did a different level at central government, in the different departments, and also in the municipalities.
Thank you.
And then so it's a little bit difficult, but it's involved in the process.
Let's see if there's any other question around the table. We've got about an hour, we have a few more minutes, but do we have any more questions? Maybe I'll ask another question then, if that's okay, if we have a couple of minutes. And this is a very basic question. And I do struggle, I admit freely, with the notion of platform. Because when I look at all of what you presented, I can wrap my head around the notion of project. I can relate to that. It's a project, so you mentioned the case of
project
Colombia,
office, you can
there's a bit of that.
Okay.
I wrap my head around the notion of cooperative, which has, recognized sort of way of bringing people together. And I understand the notions of providing services, having products. So how do you wrap it together around a definition of platform that you can live with us so that just help us understand better how to position that going forward?
So we normally use a very simple definition, that is, platform is a combination of a variety of actors, a variety of methodologies, and a variety of actions. This is the difference with a project. The project can be developed by one single actor. A platform can never be developed by one single actor, so it's a variety of actors. A platform cannot rely on one method. It's a variety of methods that you use depending on the moment and that you actually offer, and then a variety of actions that are interconnected. For us, if you take those three categories, I think you can navigate the platform work easier. But normally we put the example as an example. I don't know if it works. In Spanish, works very well because in Spanish we use the word platform to talk about a platform of neighbors, plataforma de vecinos. So it's like when you want to talk about when your neighbors get together to protest about something, you call that a platform.
Like a coalescence, a coalition.
Yeah. So in Spanish, that's una plataforma. That's a platform of neighbors. At the same time, a platform obviously is a digital platform. So for us, the combination of what you have in mind as a digital platform, to buy goods, and the platform of your neighbors protesting for something. The combination of the two is what a platform is.
And for us, yeah, for us, I'm going to continue, for example, the sample of Mondragon, what we consider is a platform. There is everything in Mondragon, we think everything is linked. Every initiative, every project, every rules, all is connected. And our platform is something like so basic as our values, our principles that are deployed in every ordinary activity and every strategy and every project that connects the project. And this is our platform. Also, this, I told you, this intercooperation funds that for us very important for the sustainability of the system. And these are dedicated funds to many different projects, to many different activities. And for us, this generosity to share the money is a very big and powerful platform. And our platform principles, values, intercooperation. And this link everything.
Was that useful? Or
Actually, I thought
Or
it was
not.
very useful. I had reached the same conclusion in my head, but it's good to
Yeah.
hear it because there is a lot of different understanding what platforms are, particularly now when you see, at the industrial level, such large, mostly digital platforms coming in, providing services and products. And I think that is something that has an element of what we aspire to be in play, but largely, in the case of UNDP, as I see it, our real platform is the shared common values and principles that we all operate as a network of 138 offices in different cultural contexts. That's very important as a platform, and the ability to operate along certain standardized elements, which we have to change. That's where the innovation can well happen. It's around our standard approaches on the provision of the services. But what you mentioned now, actors, methodologies, and actions is actually a very good frame to explain a lot of the innovation thinking about the different ecosystem that needs to come together.
How do you bring those
So
elements? Because the project, the linearity, can work with single projects. Platform the way UNDP does. UNDP cannot work without a variety of actors, a lot of methods and actions. But actually, those are connected, in a way that you are serving a purpose. In this case, your purpose is, the sustainable development. And so what are the actors, the methodologies, and the actions that in a particular setting, in a particular country, are interconnected to achieve sustainable development? And I think if we just make that as simple as that, I think it will help. All of us. But it's true, it's very complicated because the digital dimension and the offline, normally the platform today is automatically linked with digital. And the digital and digital is very important because it takes you some, but actually there are a lot of platforms that are not digital. And that's the way I love the neighbor picture. Normally used like, a platform can be just a group of neighbors trying to fix something. And that's a great platform. It doesn't need to be digital.
No, absolutely. Well, that was very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, colleagues. I think the colleagues online as well, thank you. We had around 18, 20 people connect at any one time. So thank you all for doing that. And we certainly look forward to hearing more and learning from each other on how to take this platform aspiration forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
So just one question. So can you share the PowerPoint?
Sure. This is recorded, by the way.
Okay.